under the copper sky of Arizona Territory, where the sun burned like a forge and the wind carried whispers of death, Jake Morrison rode into Salvation Creek with hollow eyes and a heart heavy as stone. The town that had once bustled with miners and merchants now lay eerily silent, its wooden buildings standing like tombstones against the desert. Shutters hung askew, doors gaped open like mouths frozen in silent screams, and the acrid smell of burning sage mixed with something far more sinister, the sweet, cloying stench of decay. Jake had been riding for 3 days straight, his horse's hooves kicking up clouds of dust that settled like ash on his weathered face. He was a man carved from hardship, lean and tall, with hands that had known rope and iron, violence and tenderness in equal measure. His dark hair hung past his collar, unkempt, and his blue eyes held the kind of weariness that came from seeing too much of the world's cruelty. He had been a lawman once, before the badge became too heavy with the weight of choices that haunted his sleep. The silence pressed against him as he guided his mare down the main street. No children played in the dust, no women hung laundry, no men gathered outside the saloon to argue about cattle prices or the weather. Windows stared back at him like dead eyes, and the only movement came from tumbleweeds that rolled across his path like souls fleeing judgment. He dismounted outside what had once been the general store, tying his horse to a post that leaned at an unnatural angle. "Hello?" he called, his voice cracking the stillness like a whip. The echo came back to him hollow and mocking. He pushed open the store's door, and the hinges screamed in protest. Inside, shelves lay overturned, their contents scattered across the floor, like the remnants of lives abandoned in haste. A child's doll lay face down in a pool of something dark, and Jake felt his stomach turn. It was then he heard it, a low, rhythmic chanting that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The sound was alien to his ears, yet somehow familiar, like a half-remembered lullaby from a dream he couldn't quite grasp. He followed the sound through the empty streets, past the silent church where the bell hung motionless in its tower, past the schoolhouse where children's drawings still decorated the windows in faded colors. The chanting grew stronger as he approached the edge of town, where the desert reclaimed the land in waves of sage and prickly pear. There, in a clearing surrounded by ancient cottonwoods, he saw her. She knelt in the center of a circle drawn in the dirt, her long black hair falling like a waterfall around her shoulders. Her skin was bronze in the dying light, and she wore simple deerskin clothing that seemed to glow with its own inner fire. Her hands moved in intricate patterns as she chanted, and around her small fires burned in clay bowls, sending spirals of smoke into the darkening sky. Jake approached slowly, his boots crunching on dry leaves. She must have heard him, but she didn't stop her ritual, didn't acknowledge his presence. Her voice rose and fell like wind through canyon walls, speaking words in a language that predated the town, the territory, perhaps even the memory of the land itself. Her face was young, but bore the gravity of someone who had seen beyond the veil that separated the living from the dead. "Ma'am," Jake said softly, removing his hat. Still, she continued her chanting. He waited, understanding somehow that this was not a moment to interrupt, that whatever she was doing was more important than his questions or his presence. The smoke from her fires carried scents of cedar and something else, something that made his head feel light and his vision sharpen. Finally, as the last light faded from the western sky, she fell silent. The sudden absence of her voice felt like a weight lifting from the air. She looked up at him then, and Jake found himself staring into eyes the color of storm clouds, deep and knowing, and infinitely sad. "You come from the dead town," she said, her voice like water over stones, accented with the cadence of her people. "You wonder why the silence follows you like a shadow." Jake nodded, finding his voice. "Disease took them. Plague, they called it in the last telegram that came through. But I've seen plague before, and this—" He gestured toward the town. "This is different. This is wrong." She rose gracefully like smoke ascending and began to gather her ritual items. "My name is Aiyana," she said, though she had not been asked. "I am what your people call medicine woman, though the word is small for what I am. I have been fighting the darkness that devours your town for 7 days and 7 nights. "Fighting?" Jake asked. "Fighting what?" Aiyana's eyes met his, and in them he saw a depth of knowledge that made him feel like a child. "There are hungers that live in the spaces between breath," she said. "Appetites that feed not on flesh, but on the force that makes flesh move. Your town has been chosen as a feeding ground for something that should not exist in this world." Jake felt the hair on his neck stand up. He was a practical man, used to dealing with rustlers and claim jumpers, men whose motivations he could understand even if he couldn't condone them. But standing here in the gathering darkness, watching this woman who seemed to glow with her own inner light, he found himself believing things he would have dismissed as superstition just hours before. "Why are you helping them?" he asked. "They're not your people." Aiyana gathered the last of her bowls, her movements precise and ritualistic. "Suffering recognizes no boundaries," she said. "The darkness that feeds here will not stop with one town. It will spread like wildfire through dry grass, consuming everything in its path. My people, your people, all people, we are the same when the shadow falls." Jake studied her face in the flickering light of the dying fires. There was something in her expression, a pain that went deeper than concern for strangers. "There's more to it than that," he said. She paused, her hand stilling on the leather pouch where she kept her sacred items. "My brother," she said quietly. "He was trading in your town when the darkness came. He's trapped there now, neither living nor dead, held by the hunger that feeds on life itself." The weight of her words settled on Jake like a shroud. He had seen the shadows moving in the windows of the buildings, had dismissed them as tricks of the light. Now he understood that they were something far worse, the remnants of souls caught between worlds, unable to die, unable to live. "What can I do?" he asked, and the words surprised him as they left his mouth. He had come here by accident, following a trail that had gone cold, but now he felt drawn into something larger than himself. Aiyana looked at him with those storm cloud eyes, and for the first time since he had found her she smiled. It was a sad smile, but it held warmth. "You can help me walk into the belly of the beast," she said. "But know this, the path we must take leads through the valley of the shadow of death, and not all who enter will emerge unchanged." Jake nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "I've been walking through that valley for years, ma'am. At least now I'll have company." Oh. They made their camp at the edge of town, where the desert met the first weathered buildings. Aiyana built a fire, not with matches, but with flint and steel, speaking words over the flames that made them burn with unusual colors. Jake unsaddled his horse and settled her near a patch of hardy grass, then sat across from the medicine woman as she prepared tea from herbs she carried in her medicine bag. "Tell me about this darkness," Jake said, accepting the clay cup she offered him. The tea was bitter but warming, and it seemed to clear his head of the fog that had been gathering since he entered the town. Aiyana stared into the flames, her face painted with light and shadow. "There are places where the veil between worlds grows thin," she said. "Sacred places, cursed places, places where great violence or great sorrow has soaked into the earth itself. Your town was built on such a place. What happened there? Long ago, before your people came, before my people came, there was another people. They built a city there, a place of learning and wisdom. But they grew proud, began to seek knowledge that was not meant for mortal minds. They opened doors that should have remained closed, invited in guests that should never have been welcomed." Jake sipped his tea, feeling the heat spread through his chest. And something came through. "Something hungry," Aiyana confirmed. "Something that had been waiting in the spaces between stars for an invitation to feast. It devoured that ancient city, consumed every living thing, and when there was nothing left to eat, it slept. The earth covered the ruins, grass grew over the bones, and time forgot what had happened there. Until now. Until now. Your town awakened it with their digging, their mining, their disturbance of the sacred earth. The hunger stirred and began to feed again. Jake stared into the fire, trying to process what she was telling him. So what do we do? How do we fight something like that? Aiyana's hands moved in the air, tracing symbols that seemed to linger in the smoke. We must go to the heart of the darkness, to the place where it first broke through. There, we must perform a ritual of binding, seal the breach between worlds before it grows too large to contain. And your brother. Her voice grew soft, heavy with pain. If we are successful, he will be freed. If we fail. She didn't finish the sentence, but Jake understood. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to embers. In the distance, Jake could hear sounds from the town. Not the sounds of life, but something else. Whispers carried on the wind, the creak of doors opening and closing, the shuffle of feet that might not be feet at all. I have to ask, Jake said finally. Why trust me? You don't know me, don't know what kind of man I am. Aiyana looked at him across the dying fire, her eyes reflecting the last of the flames. I know you are a man who has lost much, she said. I know you carry guilt like a stone in your chest. I know you came here by accident, but chose to stay by design. And I know that your spirit calls to mine in a way that speaks of shared purpose. Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. There was something in her voice, in the way she looked at him, that stirred feelings he thought he had buried with his past. I'm not a good man, he said. I've done things. We have all done things, Aiyana interrupted gently. The darkness we face feeds on shame, on regret, on the wounds we carry in our hearts. To defeat it, we must first find peace with ourselves. She reached across the fire, her fingers brushing his hand. The touch was electric, sending warmth up his arm and into his chest. For a moment, the weight he had been carrying seemed lighter, the shadows in his mind less oppressive. What did you lose? She asked. Jake looked down at their joined hands, her skin warm and alive against his. A family, he said quietly, a wife and daughter. I was sheriff in a town called Bitter Springs. There was a bank robbery, and I was so focused on catching the men who did it that I didn't see the bigger picture. Didn't realize they were using my family as bait. His voice grew rough, heavy with old pain. By the time I got home, they were already dead. Killed while I was chasing shadows in the desert. The men who did it left a note, said it was payment for something I'd done years before, some outlaw I'd killed whose brother wanted revenge. Aiyana's grip on his hand tightened. And you've been running from that guilt ever since. Couldn't stay in Bitter Springs. Couldn't be the sheriff anymore. Couldn't be anything. So I became a drifter. Taking odd jobs, trying to help people when I could, trying to make up for the help I couldn't give when it mattered most. Is that why you're here? To help? Jake met her eyes, seeing understanding there, not judgment. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of running. Indeed, they slept that night on opposite sides of the fire, but Jake found himself aware of every breath she took, every small movement she made. He dreamed of shadows and whispers, of a city that existed in the spaces between heartbeats, and of a woman whose voice could heal or destroy, depending on the words she chose to speak. Dawn came like a blade, cutting through the darkness, sharp and clean. Jake woke to find Aiyana already up, preparing for the day's work. She had painted her face with symbols in white clay, and her hair was braided with feathers and small bones. She looked like a warrior preparing for battle, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Today we go into the town, she said, handing him a cup of the bitter tea. We must find the source of the darkness, the place where the breach is widest. It will be where the shadows are thickest, where the air itself seems to hunger. Jake drank the tea, feeling it burn away the last of his sleep. How will we know it when we see it? You will know, Aiyana said simply. The darkness calls to the darkness in all of us. It will try to use your guilt, your shame, your regret as weapons against you. You must be strong, must remember that the past is dead and only the present has power. They saddled Jake's horse and walked into the town together, leading the animal between them. The street seemed even emptier in the daylight, if that was possible. Windows stared down at them like dead eyes, and the silence was so complete it seemed to press against their eardrums. As they walked deeper into the town, Jake began to notice things he had missed before, shadows that fell in the wrong directions, as if the sun itself was afraid to shine directly on certain places. Doors that stood open to rooms that seemed larger inside than the buildings that contained them, and everywhere the sense of being watched by things that had no eyes. "There," Aiyana said, pointing toward the center of town. "The old well." Jake looked where she was pointing and saw it, a stone well that sat in the middle of what had once been the town square. It was old, far older than the buildings around it, made of stones that had been worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. The darkness seemed to pool around it like water, and Jake could swear he heard whispers rising from its depths. "That's where they broke through," Aiyana said, "where the ancient city touched the surface world. The miners must have damaged the seals when they dug their tunnels." As they approached the well, Jake began to see them, the shadows that moved independently of their sources, the faces that appeared in windows and vanished when looked at directly. And there, sitting on the edge of the well with his back to them, was a figure that made Aiyana gasp. "Tahatan," she whispered, and Jake heard the love and pain in her voice. The figure turned, and Jake saw that it had once been a young man, probably in his 20s, with the same bronze skin and dark hair as Aiyana. But his eyes were empty, not dead, but hollow, as if something essential had been drained from them. When he spoke, his voice came from somewhere far away. "Sister," he said, the word carrying no emotion, "you should not have come." Aiyana stepped forward, tears streaming down her painted cheeks. "I came to save you, brother, to bring you home." Tahatan's head tilted like a bird's, and when he smiled, Jake saw that his teeth were too sharp, too white. "Home?" he asked. "But I am home. I am fed. I am warm. I am never hungry or cold or tired. The darkness loves me, sister. It keeps me safe." "It's not love," Aiyana said firmly. "It's possession. You are being used, consumed slowly, so that the hunger can savor you. You are dying by inches, brother." "We are all dying," Tahatan replied. "The darkness simply makes it beautiful." Jake watched the exchange with growing horror. This was what the thing in the well did. It didn't just kill, it corrupted, turned love into a weapon and hope into despair. He could see the shadows moving around them now, growing bolder, reaching out with tendrils of pure darkness. "Aiyana," he said urgently, "we need to start the ritual, now." She nodded, pulling items from her medicine bag, sacred herbs, stones carved with symbols, a knife that gleamed with more than just metal. "Hold them back," she said. "Give me time to complete the binding." Jake drew his pistol, though he wasn't sure what good it would do against shadows. But as the darkness pressed closer, he began to fire. And to his surprise, the bullets seemed to tear holes in the writhing mass of shadow, causing it to recoil with sounds like screaming wind. Aiyana began to chant, her voice rising above the chaos. She threw the herbs into the well, and they burst into flame as they fell, sending up pillars of light that made the shadows howl. The stones she placed around the well's rim began to glow, and Jake could feel the air itself becoming charged with power. "No!" Tahatan screamed, but his voice was no longer his own. It was layered with other voices, older voices, hungry voices that spoke of appetites that spanned millennia. "You cannot unmake what has been made. You cannot close what has been opened." The darkness around them began to coalesce, taking shape, becoming something that hurt to look at directly. Jake continued firing, his bullets somehow finding their mark, even though his target seemed to shift and change with each shot. He could feel the thing's attention focusing on him, could feel it probing at his mind, looking for the guilt and shame it could use against him. Images flooded his vision. his wife's face, as she realized he wouldn't be coming home in time, his daughter's toys scattered across the floor of their ransacked house, the accusation in the eyes of the townspeople who blamed him for not protecting his own family. The weight of his failures pressed down on him like a physical force, and his gun hand began to shake. "Jake!" Aiyana's voice cut through the mental assault. "The past is dead. Only the present has power." Her words gave him strength, and he forced himself to focus on the here and now, on the ritual she was performing, on the light that was growing brighter around the well. The darkness recoiled from his renewed determination, and he heard it shriek in frustration. Aiyana's chanting reached a crescendo, and she raised the sacred knife above her head. "By the power of earth and sky, by the strength of those who came before and those who will come after, I bind you," she cried, and brought the blade down to cut her own palm. Her blood hit the stones around the well, and they blazed with light so bright that Jake had to shield his eyes. The darkness let out a roar that shook the ground, and suddenly the air was filled with the sound of rushing wind, as if a great hole had been torn in the world itself. Through the chaos, Jake saw Tahartan fall to his knees, his empty eyes suddenly filling with awareness and pain. The shadows that had been wrapped around him like chains burned away, and he collapsed, gasping, on the dusty ground. The well began to glow from within, and Jake could see something moving in its depths. Not the darkness this time, but light, pure and clean and ancient. The shadows around them began to flee, pouring back into the well like water flowing downhill, carrying with them the whispers and the hunger and the wrongness that had infected the town. Aiyana collapsed beside her brother, her strength spent, blood still flowing from her cut palm. Jake holstered his gun and knelt beside them, taking off his bandana to bind her wound. "Is it over?" he asked. She looked up at him, her storm-cloud eyes now clear and bright. "The breach is sealed," she said. "The darkness is banished, but the town—" She looked around at the empty buildings, the silent streets. "The people are gone. They were consumed before we arrived." Jake felt a weight settle on his chest, but it was different from the guilt he had been carrying. This was sadness, pure and clean, for lives that had been lost and could not be recovered. "At least it won't spread," he said. Tahartan stirred in his sister's arms, his eyes focusing on her face. "Aiyana," he whispered, his voice weak but human again. "I'm here, brother," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm here." They stayed by the well until the sun reached its zenith, watching as the last of the shadows fled into the depths and the light sealed the breach behind them. Slowly, the town began to feel normal again, empty but normal, like a place where people had once lived rather than a place where they had been devoured. As the afternoon wore on, they heard the sound of horses approaching. A group of riders came into view, townspeople from the settlements to the south, drawn by reports of the strange silence that had fallen over Salvation Creek. They rode cautiously, rifles ready, but their expressions changed to wonder as they saw Jake and Aiyana helping Tahartan to his feet. "What happened here?" asked their leader, a weathered man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. Jake looked at Aiyana, and she nodded slightly. "Plague," he said simply. "But it's over now. The sickness has passed." The sheriff looked skeptical, but he dismounted and approached the well. "Heard tell there was something unnatural about this place," he said. "Heard the shadows themselves were hungry." "Shadows are just the absence of light," Aiyana said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had looked into the heart of darkness and emerged victorious. "When the light returns, the shadows flee." The townspeople spread out through the settlement, checking buildings, looking for survivors. They found none, but they also found no bodies, no signs of violence or disease. It was as if the people had simply vanished, leaving behind only their possessions and their memories. "We'll need to tell their families," the sheriff said. "Send word to the territorial capital. This place will need to be officially abandoned." "No," said a voice from behind them. They turned to see an elderly woman dismounting from a wagon, her grey hair braided with silver ornaments. She looked at Aiyana with recognition and respect. "I am Mary Crow Feather, elder of the Chiricahua. I have felt the disturbance in the earth, heard the cries of the hungry dead. This place must be blessed, not abandoned." She walked to the well and placed her hands on the stones that still glowed faintly with inner light. "The darkness is sealed, but the seal must be maintained. This place must become sacred ground, protected and honored." Jake watched as the two women spoke in rapid Apache, their words carrying the weight of ceremony and tradition. He understood that something larger than himself was happening here, something that connected the present to the past and the future in ways he could barely comprehend. As evening fell, the townspeople made camp around the well, building fires and sharing food. Jake found himself sitting beside Aiyana as she tended to her brother, who was slowly recovering his strength. The cut on her palm had healed with unnatural speed, leaving only a thin, white scar. "What happens now?" Jake asked. Aiyana looked at him with those storm cloud eyes, and he saw in them a future he had never dared to imagine. "Now we live," she said simply. "We build something new from the ashes of what was lost." "Together?" She smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds after a long storm. "If you choose to stay, if you choose to help guard this place, to make sure the darkness never returns." Jake thought of his old life, of the guilt and the running and the endless search for redemption that had never quite come. Then he looked at this woman who had walked into hell to save her brother, who had trusted him with her life and her mission, who had shown him that the past was dead and only the present had power. "I choose to stay," he said. That night, as the fires burned low and the people settled into sleep, Jake found himself standing guard beside the well with Aiyana. The stones no longer glowed, but they hummed with a deep, peaceful resonance that seemed to connect them to the earth itself. "What was your name?" Aiyana asked softly. "Your real name, not the one you've been using." Jake looked at her, surprised. "How did you know?" "A man running from his past rarely keeps his real name," she said. "It's too heavy to carry." "Jacob," he said after a moment. "Jacob Aaron Morrison. I haven't said that name in 5 years." "Jacob," she repeated, tasting the word. "It means he who wrestles with God. It suits you." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. In the distance, a coyote howled, and another answered, and the desert came alive with the small sounds of nocturnal hunters and their prey. "Aiyana," Jake said. "What does your name mean?" She smiled. "Eternal blossom. My grandmother gave it to me because she said I would bring life to places where death had ruled. She was right. She was wise. She taught me that darkness is not evil, only the absence of light, and that sometimes the only way to bring light to a place is to carry it there yourself." 3 months later, Jake stood on the porch of a small adobe house built at the edge of what had once been Salvation Creek. The town had been rebuilt, but different now, smaller, more careful, with the well at its center converted into a shrine where travelers could leave offerings and receive blessings. Aiyana emerged from the house, her belly rounded with new life, her face glowing with the inner light that had first drawn him to her. She carried a letter in her hand, and her expression was troubled. "What is it?" Jake asked. "A message from the territorial governor," she said. "There are reports of similar incidents in other places. Towns going silent, people disappearing, shadows that move independently of their sources." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. "The darkness is spreading?" "Not spreading," Aiyana corrected. "Awakening. There are other places like this one, other breaches that were sealed long ago and are now beginning to weaken. The mining, the railroads, the disturbance of sacred places, it's all connected." She handed him the letter, and he read it with growing alarm. 7 towns in 3 territories, all suffering from the same mysterious plague of silence. The governor was offering a substantial reward for anyone who could provide answers or solutions. "They want us to come," Jake said, "to help." And Aiyana nodded, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "The child will be born in 2 months. After that, if you're willing, we could travel. We could help others, as we helped here." Jake looked out over the desert, where the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold. He thought of other towns, other people trapped in darkness, other families torn apart by forces they couldn't understand. Then he thought of the power he had seen in Aiyana's hands, the light that could drive back any shadow. "I'm willing," he said, "but this time, we don't go alone. We gather others, people who understand the old ways and the new. We build something that can stand against the darkness wherever it appears." Aiyana smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "A new kind of law enforcement," she said, "not just for crimes against people, but crimes against the world itself." "The Order of the Light," Jake said, the name coming to him as if whispered by the desert wind. "Yes," Aiyana agreed, "the Order of the Light." As if summoned by their words, Mary Crowfeather appeared at the edge of their property, leading a small group of people, some Apache, some Mexican, some white, all bearing the marks of those who had seen beyond the veil between worlds. "We felt the calling," the elder said simply. "The earth itself cries out for protectors. We have come to offer our service." Jake looked at Aiyana, and she nodded. They had found each other in darkness, had forged their love in the fires of battle against forces that sought to devour the world. Now they would build something new, something that could stand as a bulwark against the hungry shadows that threatened to consume everything they held dear. The baby was born on a night when the aurora borealis danced across the desert sky, painting the darkness with ribbons of green and gold light. Jake held his son, for it was a son, strong and healthy, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn chin, and felt the last of his guilt finally slip away. "What will we call him?" Aiyana asked, exhausted but radiant. Jake looked down at the small face, peaceful in sleep, and thought of all the darkness they had faced, all the light they had brought to the world. "Thomas," he said, "Thomas Lightbringer Morrison." Aiyana smiled. "A good name, a strong name." Outside, the members of the Order of the Light maintained their vigil, watching over the sacred well and the growing town that surrounded it. They had come from across the territory and beyond, drawn by stories of the couple who had faced down the darkness and emerged victorious. Some were medicine people like Aiyana, others were former lawmen like Jake. Still others were simply people who had seen too much of the world's hidden horrors to remain silent. Together, they would travel to the places where the darkness stirred, would seal the breaches and guard the sacred sites, would stand as a thin line between the world of the living and the hungry shadows that pressed against the barriers between worlds. But for now, in this moment, there was only peace. The baby slept in his father's arms. The mother rested in her bed, and the desert wind carried the scent of rain and growing things. The darkness had been held back, not just here, but in 7 other towns where the Order had already begun its work. Jake looked out the window at the shrine that had once been a well, where travelers left offerings of gratitude and hope. Carved into the stone were the words that had become the Order's motto: "The past is dead, only the present has power." And in the present, there was light. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the people of the town emerged from their houses and gathered around the shrine. They came not in fear, but in gratitude, not as supplicants, but as partners in the great work of keeping the darkness at bay. Jake watched from his porch as they knelt, not in worship, but in respect, acknowledging the sacrifice that had been made and the vigilance that must be maintained. Among them were the members of the Order, easily identified by the silver badges they wore, not the tin stars of traditional lawmen, but sacred symbols that gleamed with their own inner light. "They understand," Aiyana said, joining him on the porch with Thomas in her arms. They know that what we did here, what we continue to do, is not just about fighting monsters. It's about preserving the light that makes us human. Jake nodded, wrapping his arms around his wife and son. And they know that as long as there are people willing to stand against the darkness, that light will never go out. In the distance, a rider approached, carrying a message from another town, another place where the shadows were stirring. Jake recognized the signs, the urgent pace, the dust that rose like smoke, the weight of desperate hope in the way the rider held himself in the saddle. "Another call," he said. "Another chance to bring light to the darkness," Aiyana replied. They would answer the call, as they always did. But first, they would take a moment to appreciate what they had built here, what they had preserved. The town of Salvation Creek lived up to its name now, a place where the lost could find their way, where the darkness was held at bay by the combined strength of people who had chosen to stand together against the hungry shadows. And in the center of it all, the shrine stood as a beacon of hope, a reminder that no matter how deep the darkness, there would always be those willing to carry the light. The rider reached the town and dismounted, his message clutched in his dust-covered hand. Jake could see the fear in his eyes, the desperation that came with witnessing something beyond human understanding. But he could also see the hope that came with knowing that help was possible, that somewhere in the world there were people who understood the nature of the darkness and knew how to fight it. "Welcome to Salvation Creek," Jake called out to the rider. "You've come to the right place." The man looked up at the couple on the porch, at the baby in the woman's arms, at the town that bustled with normal life despite the sacred power that flowed through its heart. His face crumpled with relief, and he fell to his knees in the dust. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Jake stepped down from the porch and helped the man to his feet. "We never give up," he said. "That's what the Order of the Light is for, to make sure no one has to face the darkness alone." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, the people of Salvation Creek returned to their daily lives. But the gratitude in their eyes remained, and the knowledge that they were part of something larger, something that connected them to the great work of keeping the world safe from the shadows that pressed against the barriers between worlds. The Order of the Light had been born from love and sacrifice, forged in the fires of battle against forces that sought to devour the world. And as long as there were people willing to stand against the darkness, to carry the light into the places where hope had died, it would continue to grow and spread, a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it. In the shrine at the center of town, the stones hummed with peaceful power, and the words carved into them caught the morning light. "The past is dead, only the present has power. And in the present there was light, there was always light."